Hey, this is Osama, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about how we don't exist. Welcome to the Freedom from Ego. So, in this show, we might wonder what is the direction that we want to go towards? What is the ideal position where we should be in order to free ourselves from the ego? Well, I thought long and hard about this, and I came to the conclusion that what we need is a goalpost, basically a place where we could say that here, this is where our egos are free. This is where we are separate from our egos, where we can objectively set aside our ego and to see the world more objectively and free from delusion. And I thought long and hard about this, and I came to one conclusion, and that is that we don't exist. So, what do I mean by we don't exist? Well, in talking about the goalpost and in thinking about the goalpost of freedom from the ego, I remembered a very distinct spiritual, yes, spiritual moment in my life. And that moment is what I experienced was called the state of oneness or the state of ego death. In order to understand ego death, you need to understand how we see the world. Basically, there's this philosophy known as non-duality. Non-duality says that whenever we look at anything, we compare it to something else. So, what if someone is tall? Well, if someone is tall, you're comparing it to someone who is short. If you're saying something is beautiful, you're comparing it to something which is in your mind not beautiful. When you're saying I am a great person, you're basically comparing yourself to someone who is not great. And so goes the analogy that everything that we do, everything that we see in terms of a hierarchy, up and down, basically with one part being above the other. And you can sort of imagine that if we stop looking at the world in terms of these hierarchies, for example, if there was no hierarchy in good and bad, how would you judge something if it's good or if it's bad? You can sort of understand how everything that we have around us starts to fall apart. And so, how does this relate to ego death? Well, when I was studying non-duality and I was listening to Leo Gura's podcast, he was talking about this concept, and when I started to in myself feel destroying these hierarchies and slowly melting them away, I felt something which was not expected. So, what was that experience? Well, what I started feeling was internally that everything that I held around me as solid, as something which is of substance, which exists, started to feel like fading away. Reality, in a way, started to become more liquid, and the things that I attached with these objects, the qualities, the characteristics, they all started to fade away when I started to destroy their duality. When I made them one, it all started to become very liquid, and everything around me started to feel liquid. And so, in that process, in my mind, I was destroying more and more hierarchies, and in the end, I reached at myself. When I reached at myself, I started to destroy the hierarchies of me versus the other, and so this hierarchy was diffused. Reality versus non-reality, me existing versus non-existing. You can see that if these hierarchies are kept on being destroyed, you can sort of imagine the effect that it would have on the concepts of us existing and us being separate. And so at that moment when I felt like everything was crumbling around me and everything was fading away, in some senses, what I heard was in my mind voices. And these are not some fantastical stories from oh, I heard crazy voices that started killing people. No, these voices were very vivid, and these voices were called validation. So basically what I started hearing was, as everything started to crumble around me and my own sense of self was being crumbled, were voices of other people. And these other people had faces. These were people I knew, my cousins, my family members, my friends, my people who have said anything good about me. So you can imagine there's this person standing, he has an opinion about me, opinion about how I do something very unique, or how I have this unique characteristic. And at that moment, I couldn't understand why my mind was feeding me these images and feeding me these ideas, and it was very, very confusing. And so at that moment, I realized that, oh shit, this is validation. This is your mind trying to keep you alive and keeping you away from ego death. Because at that moment, I realized that ego basically gives you separation. Separation is what keeps you and gives you your identity. And so at that moment, people, as I started to destroy the or ignore these opinions, what I started feeling was that the last straw of reality, the thing that kept me separate from this room around me or this universe around me, that started fading away as well. And so, in that state of ignoring these opinions about me, ignoring these unique qualities about me, and ignoring the fact that I was separate from the world because of said quality, I felt like I became one with the universe. But I'm trying my best to explain that the experience felt like the self understood that the self does not exist. So when I was writing down my experience for future reference for this episode, for example, I could not pinpoint to who I was, because I was everything around here. And ego death is usually very, very, it's seen in terms of a very fantastical or some very spiritually enlightening experiences, and it was very spiritually enlightening, sorry. But in reality, what ego death is basically it dissolves all the separation between you and this universe, and it allows you to see the fact that you don't in fact exist, that all the boundaries that you've put up between you and the universe are basically just references, ways of telling yourself that you're separate from the universe, from the universal order. But that experience was not just restricted to a non dualistic world. When I came back to the dualistic consciousness, what started happening was that I could actually see the language of ego. The language of ego is separation, as I always say. Separation because the mind internally knows that it does not exist. And these separations are put in place through the products that we buy, through the things that we say, through the people that we date, through our fashion, through our the things that we show to other people. Other people are necessary in order to make ourselves feel like we exist. And this is one of the most profound things. So after my experience and coming back to normal reality, I noticed one thing, and it became very, very evident that when I would, for example, sit on my bike, it's a unique bike. It's a red bike, and people are not used to seeing this kind of thing. And so in the road, I would drive like I never would if people were not looking. I would drive slower when people were. I felt like people were looking at me, and drive faster when certain situations. And it's not like I'm free from ego completely, but what I do know is I know how to spot it now. I know how to spot it. And I know that whenever on the road, or whenever I'm doing something related to other people, or even to myself, if I tell myself the story that I'm unique because of X, it's mostly due to my ego telling me that you exist, when in reality I don't. And so, what do we learn from this experience? What we learn is that my goal for my life and for my spiritual enlightenment is that experience, going towards a state of low ego, or going towards a state of enlightenment, going towards a state of ego death. And enlightenment, if you study, and we're going to talk about it more here, is the death of ego, is the acceptance of non-duality, is accepting the fact that we do not exist. And so for us to go there, it's a very tough thing. And for when I was studying, when I was watching Leo Gura's podcast, what he was saying is that sometimes our minds are not ready to accept such an experience, and some such experiences can be a glimmer, a glimpse, and because your mind isn't prepared, you go back to your normal self. But what happens is that at least you have a goalpost, at least you have an idea of where you want to go. And take this experience as something which is not to make you feel bad in any way. Never feel bad for not having this experience. You're gonna have it like later on in your life. Maybe you're just not ready, maybe you've had it and you don't realize it. And so take this experience as like a goalpost. And the thing that we learn from this experience is ego talks about separation, and we will separate ourselves from every separation. And for the future, this is freedom from ego, and this is where we want to go. Thank you so much.